want to read our first story for the night? You see the screen, right?
Yeah, I see it.
Jay, can you read? It's a short one.
Ramar Rabba Bar Chana, Zimna Chada, Hava Ka Azlinan, Bis Finta V'Chazinan, Hahu Kvara, Deltva Chalta Agver, V'Kadach Agma. Sabrinan Yavashta, Ki V'Salkinan, V'Afinan, Uvashlinan, Agbe V'Chad, Cham Gaviha Itafich V'ilav Dehava Mikrava Sepinta Hava Tavinan.
Okay, thanks for reading. Okay, the Gemara says another story about Rabbi Bar Chana. Anybody remembers earlier in the summer, I mentioned that there's like 2 dapim in this area in Baba Batra about Rabbi Bar Chana's travels around the desert. And we said we were learning it around the time of Parashat Korach, how he went to the Midbar and a tour guide brought him around and showed him the land that had swallowed up Korach and his followers. And he put his ear to the ground and he heard him saying, Moshe emet v'Torato emet, and that we were wrong and Moshe was right. So this is another story from that same trip that Rabbi Bar Chana was making. He says, I was traveling on a boat and we saw this large fish that was sitting still, and there was sand on it and there was grass growing on it. And so we thought it was land. So we settled down, we docked the ship, and we settled down on top of this thing that we thought was land, and we started eating and baking and cooking. And then the fish turned over, and we realized that we weren't on land, we were on a fish. But luckily, our rescue boat was still close by, so we didn't end up drowning. Okay, a little bit of a funny story. So what's the lesson? Any suggestions? It's hard. It's a hard one. Okay. So what I heard is that very often we think we're on firm ground, right? This is a message a lot of people were talking about at the beginning of Corona, that everything we thought we had was falling apart. We thought everything we thought was normal. We go to school in the morning, not anymore. You go to shul when you come home from school, not anymore. You go to the supermarket to buy your food, nope, not anymore. Amazon can deliver same day, nope, not anymore. Everything we thought was consistent in life was falling apart. So the same thing with Rabbi Bar Chana. He thought that he was sitting on firm ground, but really Hashem could turn that around in a second and show us that we so much rely on him, and we're not really sitting on such firm ground. And the point being that until he found that his boat was close by, the boat is like the Torah that saves us. That there's so much stuff that's not steady in the world, but what rescued us, what rescued Rabbi Bar Chana, and what rescues us in general in life is the Torah that keeps us steady. That's the boat that we could reach out to whenever we feel like we're drowning. The Maharsha says that this was actually talking about the Jews in the times of Achashverosh, that they thought everything was fine and doing great, and we're close with Achashverosh, and then suddenly this evil guy Haman rises up and starts to threaten us, until Mordechai being the boat who came to save us. Mordechai came and saved the day, made us do teshuvah, he told us to fast and everything, and he's what saved us. He's that boat. That's what the Maharsha says that this Gemara is talking about. Okay. Any questions on that story before we move on to the next? Okay. Another one from Baba Batra. Okay. Anyone want to read this one? No, Grandpa likes this one. It's not really.
Jinx.
So,
Who was it? Sal?
I could read it, or Sal could read it, or Hami.
Okay. Ezra B, you're fine. You could go first.
Okay. There were 4 people who died only because of the counsel of the primordial snake, in the wake of which all of humanity became mortal, and not on account of any personal sin. And they are Binyamin, the son of Yaakov, Amram, the father of Moshe, Yishai, the father of David, and Chilkab, the son of David.
Kilav, I think it's pronounced. It's hard to read in English. Kilav, the son of David. Okay, so Grandpa likes to talk about this list of guys who died without doing a sin. The 4 people are Binyamin, the youngest son of Yaakov, Amram, the father of Moshe, Yishai, the father of David, and Kilav, the son of David. Okay, so just what I wanted to point out here is it's not the biggest tzaddikim we ever heard of, right? Who are the big tzaddikim that we talk about? The Avod, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, Moshe and Aaron, David, all those guys. The assumption is that they did sin. As great as they were, they did sin. These 4 guys are kind of, at least Kilav, probably most of us have never heard of. Binyamin, Amram, and Yishai we've heard of, but they're not like the biggest, the first guy you would think of when you say who was the biggest tzaddik in the Torah. It's not one of those guys. So what's the story here? I think the answer is, and it's an important idea, the Gemara says that Hashem made David sin, so to speak, so he could teach us the lesson of doing teshuvah. That those other guys, this list of people, they never sinned, but they also never had the opportunity to do teshuvah. How strong teshuvah is. We're a couple of weeks away, 2 weeks away from starting Selichot, 2 weeks away from Elul. The power of teshuvah, that it's normal to sin. Even Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov on their level, Moshe, Aaron, David, Yosef, all of them had sinned. They did sins, but the point is that they did teshuvah. David is the prime example that we have of doing teshuvah, that he wrote. A lot of the prakim that we read in Tehillim is about how sad he was, about the sins that he did, and how important it is and how powerful it is to do teshuvah. That those guys are the guys we consider to be tzaddikim, even though they did sin. And these guys didn't sin, and we've never even heard of them. Okay, any questions on that one? No? Okay, so let's move on to the next one. That was another short one. Anyone want to read this one? Sal or Ham?
sure.
Thanks, Sal.
Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and the Satan came also among them to present himself before God. And the Lord said to the Satan, from where do you come? And the Satan answered, the Lord said, from going to the fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. The Satan said before God, Master of the universe, I have gone to and from, is that from or fro?
To and fro means like back and forth.
Fro, across the entire world, and have not found anyone and faithful as your servant Abraham, to whom you said, arise, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it to you. And when he was wanted to bury Sarah, sorry, I lost my spot.
Sorry.
It's fine. He could not find a place to bury her, and yet he did not criticize your ways or accuse you of having failed to keep your promise. About
Okay,
this
pause
it
there.
says.
Okay, so the Gemara here, this is the Gemara also in Baba Batra, is about to introduce us to the character of Eov. Have any of you ever heard of Eov?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. So
Yes.
Eov is a book in Ketuvim that is mainly about suffering. And like why tzaddikim suffer, it's a lot about those questions. Eov had a very, very, very difficult life. And we're about to see the introduction to that story. But that entire book of Eov is about that, his suffering, and then his conversations with his friends about his suffering, and then eventually his recovery from all that suffering, that Hashem gave him back all the bracha that he had in his life. But this is the introduction to that. The Gemara says that the Satan approached Hashem, and this is kind of in the first parak of Eov also, that the Satan approached Hashem and said, I was walking around, I was looking through the history books, and your son Abraham, wow, he was something else. He was really special. That he passed all your tests and everything, and he never challenged you. You told him to go to Israel, and he was good on that. And you told him to that he had to go to Mitzrayim, and his wife would be in danger, and he was okay with that. And you told him that he had to sacrifice his one beloved son, Yitzchak, and he was good with that. He didn't ask any questions. And he had to go by the Me'arat HaMachpelah after you promised him that this land would be his, and he was good with that. Wow, he was really special, that guy, Abraham. That's what the Satan says to Hashem. Okay, what does Hashem respond? So, about this, it says,
And the Lord said to the Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like
Job
him
is Eov
on earth?
in English.
Okay. A perfect and an upright man, one that fears God and turns away from evil, and still he holds fast to his integrity. Although you moved me against him to destroy him without cause. Rabbi Hanon says, were it not explicitly written in the verse, it would be impossible to say this, as it would be insulting to God's honor. The verse states, you moved me against him, like a person who others pursued and allows himself to be persuaded, as if God had not wanted to do anything, but allowed himself to be persuaded to bring harm to Job.
Okay, pause there. Okay, the Gemara says, it continues the conversation. It says that the Satan, after saying that about Abraham, Hashem says, I got this guy Eov also. He's a really great man. He loves me. He serves me very nicely. He does my mitzvot and everything. He's a big tzaddik also. You should check him out. And the Satan responds to Hashem, you never really challenged him. You always made it easy for him. He's not like Abraham. Abraham had a hard life. Eov had a very easy life. And so Hashem gives in. Hashem lets the Satan make life difficult for Eov, to test him. And the Gemara just comments that it's hard to understand about Hashem, that we say like Hashem was convinced that he should let the Satan bother Eov. Because we know Hashem doesn't have human feelings. Hashem is not a person. He doesn't have feelings of being convinced. You can't convince Hashem. So, but still, in order for us to be able to understand, sometimes Chazal and sometimes even Psukim talk as if Hashem is a person, right? We read that Hashem's Yad Chazakah, and we read that Hashem is watching us, and we read that Hashem talks to people, and we read that Hashem got angry. Things like this, they're just for human beings to relate to the ways that Hashem acts. But really, Hashem doesn't get convinced. Hashem doesn't change his mind. So the Gemara says it would be insulting to say that Hashem changed his mind. But just in order for us to relate a little bit to the concept of what happened, the Psukim say that Hashem was convinced that he should let the Satan bother Eov. Okay, so I'll keep reading. It was taught in a Braita.
It was taught in a Braita with regard to the methods of the Satan. He descends to this world and misleads a person into sinning. He then ascends to heaven, levels accusations against the very sinner, and inflames God's anger against him. He then receives permission to act and takes away the sinner's soul and punishment.
Okay, so the Gemara just ends off that how crazy it is, the actions of the Satan in general. Right? The Satan here is being used like very similar to the Yetzer Hara. That he convinces us to sin, and then he goes and points it out to Hashem. He says, Hashem, look at how bad these people are. They're doing sins, even though he's the one who convinced us. And like Ezra would say, what a trick. He convinces us, he tricks us into doing a sin, and then frames us to Hashem that we did it. And then Hashem says, they sinned. You have to punish them. Okay, just one thing I wanted to share from this Gemara is the Gemara says that the Satan said about Abraham that Hashem she'amarta lo kum hitalech ba'aretz l'orka l'rachba ki lecha etenena uv'sha'a shebikesh likbor tzara lo matza makom lekura. Okay, so that Hashem promised him the land, and when he couldn't find anywhere to bury Sarah, he didn't say to Hashem, wait, what happened? I thought you promised me the land. So this is an important line in the life of Abraham, because normally, right, I think the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says the 10 tests that Abraham Avinu had, but it doesn't tell us what were the 10. So there's a machloket about what were the 10 tests. And normally, I think Rashi says that the 10th test was the Akedah, the hardest and 10th and hardest test was the Akedah, giving up his son. But Rabbeinu Yonah says, no, the last test was trying to find. The last test was burying Sarah, that immediately after doing the Akedah, passing that test, that his wife died from it, and still he couldn't find somewhere to bury her. That it was so crazy, he thought like, okay, I'm done. I did my life's work. Hashem, I passed all your tests. And then Hashem throws one more at him. That not only he loses his wife because of it, right? The Midrash says that the Satan went and showed Sarah that Yitzchak was dying, and she passed out because of that and didn't come back to life. So Abraham lost his wife because of the sacrifice he made for Yitzchak. And still, despite Hashem's promise that he would give the land of Israel to Abraham, it didn't come so easy. He still had to go and negotiate with Ephron. So the lesson being that even though we feel like we've accomplished a lot, there's still a lot, always more to do. And for Abraham Avinu, the more to do was to still hang strong to Hashem, that his brothers were having kids and doing great and settling the land, and he almost gave up his only son. He lost his wife, and he still didn't have land, and still he continued to do what he was supposed to do. Yes, Dad?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, a few questions. First of all, was Eov Jewish?
It's a machloket. I think there's.
Was it Eov a Navi?
I do not think he was a Navi.
I thought he was. All right, he's what's it called? He's in Nevi'im, right? In Tanakh.
He's in
He has a
Ketuvim.
sefer. Oh,
Okay. The only reason I asked, Dubbin, is because when we remember the story when Moshe sent the Naglim, he said, and look around, Hayim Yesh Etz or love, no. Etzim, he was referring to Eov.
Yeah.
So what was Eov doing in Eretz Canaan already when Bnei Yisrael came out of Egypt and they were in the Midbar? If he was Jewish, he should have been with Moshe Rabbeinu receiving the Torah, and with that, instead of being in Eretz Canaan. So that's why I asked, was he Jewish?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, maybe that's a proof that he wasn't. There are opinions on both sides.
I never even heard that he wasn't. I would never think that he wasn't.
Yeah. There's even an opinion, as surprising as it sounds, there's an opinion in the Gemara that he didn't really exist. And
Yes,
it's just
I heard
a story to
that.
frame the discussion about suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know if there's a conclusion on whether he was Jewish or not. We don't even know when he lived. Okay. We got one more story for tonight. Where did Ezra G go? Is Ezra G back?
I don't know where he went.
I left. Okay. One more story. This one's from Bava Metzia. Anyone ever learn Bava Metzia? Honey?
Yeah.
Sally, you did? Okay.
75 years ago. 70 years ago. Okay.
Okay. Anyone want to read this one?
I'll read it. Baba Metzia, 59b.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay.
I hear you.
The sages said, on that day, the sages brought all the ritually pure items deemed pure by the ruling of Eliezer with regard to the oven and burned them in fire. And the sages reached a consensus in his regards and ostracized him. And the sages said, who will go and inform him of his ostracism? Rabbi Akiva, his beloved disciple, said to them, I will go, lest an unseemly person go and inform him in a callous and offensive manner, and he would thereby destroy the entire world. What did Rabbi Akiva do? He wore black and wrapped himself in black as an expression of mourning and pain, and sat before Rabbi Eliezer at a distance of 4 cubits, which is the distance that one must maintain from an ostracized individual. Rabbi Eliezer said to him, Akiva, what is different about today from other days, that you comport yourself in this manner? Rabbi Akiva said to him, my teacher, it appears to me that your colleagues are distancing themselves from you. Rabbi Eliezer too rent his garments and removed his shoes, as in the common custom of an ostracized person. And he dropped from his seat and sat upon the ground.
Okay.
The Gemara relates. Okay.
Okay, so just a little background. I think we did this story as one of the first ones that we did. So I don't know if you remember. But the Gemara has a machloket in halacha. Certain halacha, it's called tanura shel achnai, the oven of the snake. And it was a machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and the other rabbis if that type of oven is tameh or tahor, if it's pure or impure. And Rabbi Eliezer was very stubborn about his opinion, despite being against everybody else, and he was very stubborn, and he said, it must be halakha like me, because...
I heard this.
Yeah?
Yeah, and he brings like the wall will move Or
The walls will move. Exactly. Good. That's one of his proofs. And the walls start caving in, and the rabbis say, "Wait, stop it." And the trees, and he tries to bring all these wacky proofs that he's right. And in the end, the rabbis decided, "Lo bashamayim hi." The Torah is not in the heavens. Even if you bring all these miracles to prove that the halacha is like you, Hashem left it up to us to decide the halacha. So whoever is the majority, they're going to be the winners of the machloket. So sorry, I hate to break it to you, Eliezer. You're in the minority, so the halacha is not going to be like you.
Who was the Rosh Sanhedrin? Was Rabbi Eliezer the Rosh, or just
I think
one of these
Rabban Gamliel, I believe.
Okay.
Okay, so the Gemara says, so they decided they were going to put him in cherem because he was being very stubborn. But to be put in cherem was a very serious thing. It was very sad. Nobody would talk to you. Nobody would come visit you. And it was very scary. It was a big punishment to get, very severe punishment. So how were they going to tell him? They weren't just going to just say it to him. They weren't going to post it on Facebook. They had to say it to him very gently. So they sent Rabbi Akiva, who was known to be very, very gentle, very polite, who was actually Rabbi Eliezer's student. And he kind of hinted it to him. He was wearing black for like a mourner, and he sat far from him. And Rabbi Eliezer said, "What's up? What's wrong today? Why are you sitting so far? Why are you wearing black?" And Rabbi Akiva said, I think the rabbis, they don't really want to talk to you. And Rabbi Eliezer understood that he was being put in cherem, and so he, like the rules, there's a whole siman in Shulchan Aruch about what you do when you get put in cherem. You're not allowed to fight it. You have to just put yourself in mourning. So he tore his clothes and he took off his shoes, and he behaved like a mourner. He sat on the ground, like we do on Tisha B'Av. And so that's what he did. The Gemara relates. Do you want to continue, or do you want to pass it off?
Yeah, the Gemara relates. His eyes shed tears, and as a result, the entire world was afflicted. 1/3 of its olives were afflicted, and 1/3 of its wheat, and 1/3 of its barley. And some say that even dough kneaded in a woman's hand spoiled. The sages taught that there was great danger on that day, as any place that Rabbi Eliezer fixed his gaze was burned. And even Rabban Gamliel, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin at Yavneh, the head of the sages who were responsible for the decision to ostracize Rabbi Eliezer, was coming on a boat at the time, and a large wave swelled over him and threatened to drown him. Rabban Gamliel said, "It seems to me that this is only for the sake of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hakanos, as God punishes those who mistreat others." Rabban Gamliel stood on his feet and said, "Master of the universe, it is revealed and known before you that neither was this for my honor that I acted when ostracizing him, nor was it for the honor of my house or my father that I acted. Rather, it was for your honor, so that disputes will not proliferate in Israel, and respond the sea calm from its raging."
Okay, can you pause there? So, continuing the story, the Rabbi Eliezer is very sad that this punishment happened to him, and he cries out to Hashem, and Hashem responds. Hashem answers him, and he makes some scary things go on in the world, that a lot of fruit starts going spoiled, and the Gemara says that even if a woman was in the middle of baking, that challah went bad, and a wave started to threaten Rabban Gamliel, who was the head, who was in charge at the time. He was the Nasi, and so the wave was about to come crashing down on him and drown him. And he said, "Hashem, this is not fair. I understand we hurt Rabbi Eliezer's feelings, but what are we supposed to do? It was very important. I did it because we had to establish the halakha. And so we tried our best not to hurt his feelings. But still, all those things were happening because even though they were trying their best not to hurt his feelings, they did hurt his feelings. This Gemara actually is all, this page of Gemara is all about the Isur of Ona'at Devarim, not offending people with your words, saying hurtful speech. So the Gemara gives this as an example that even though they didn't intend to offend him, they didn't want to hurt his feelings, that still they did. As hard as they were trying not to, they did, and this was their punishment. Okay. Now the conclusion of the story.
Continue.
Yeah.
The Gemara further relates, Ima Shalom, the wife of Rabbi Eliezer, was the sister of Rabban Gamliel. From the incident forward, we should not allow Rabbi Eliezer to lower his head and recite the Tachanun prayer, which includes supplication and entreaties. She feared that her husband to bemoan his fate and pray at that moment, her brother would be punished. A certain day was around the day of the moon, and she inadvertently substituted a full 30-day month for deficient 29-day month. She thought that it was the new moon when one not lower his head in supplication, but it was not. Some say that a pauper came and stood at the door and she took bread out to him. The result was that she felt her husband momentarily unsupervised. When she returned, she found him and saw him and had lowered his head in prayer. She said to him, "Arise, you already killed my brother." Meanwhile, the sound of shofar emerged from the house of Rabban Gamliel to announce that the Nasi had died. Rabbi Eliezer said to her, "From where did you know that my brother would die?" She said to him, "This is your tradition that I received from the house of the father of my father. All the gates of heaven are apt to be locked except for the gates of prayer for victims of verbal mistreatment."
Okay, very, very sad ending. The Gemara relates that Rabbi Eliezer's wife, Ima Shalom was her name, was also the sister of Rabban Gamliel, who had been in charge of putting him in Cherem in the first place. And she understood the power of prayer, and she knew that Rabbi Eliezer's feelings were very hurt by Rabban Gamliel. And so she didn't want him to be able to pray about his sad feelings, because then he would pray and Rabban Gamliel would die. So every day she made sure that he couldn't focus on Tachanun. When he got to Tachanun, she would try to distract him as well as she could so that he couldn't pray and that her brother would end up dying. And the Gemara says that one day she thought it was Rosh Chodesh, so she didn't bother distracting him, and turns out it wasn't Rosh Chodesh. She thought it was a 1 day, and it turned out it was a 2 day. And so he ended up praying. He ended up saying Tachanun undistracted. And she said, "Oh gosh, what did I do?" And immediately they heard the sound of the announcing the funeral of her brother, Rabban Gamliel, that he was killed. He had died because of the prayers of Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Eliezer says, "I don't get it. How'd you know?" And she says to him, I know that the gates of Ona'ah are not closed, that the power of someone praying when he gets his feelings hurt are so strong, those tears, that Hashem answers those prayers much faster. So the lesson of the Gemara is obviously not to try your best as hard as you can not to hurt people's feelings, but also another thing, that if somebody else hurts your feelings, that instead of responding, not to pray to Hashem to kill them, God forbid, but that at your sad time you could use those tears to pray to Hashem. It's a time to be, to reach out and be close to Hashem, that Hashem answers you right away, because the gates of Ona'ah are never closed.